Welcome to the Dinosaur George podcast, a show about paleontology and other earth sciences. Dinosaur George is a public speaker, author, and TV host with 30 years of study in paleontology. He has performed live in over 4,500 events across the US and Canada. Now, here is Dinosaur George.
Well, hey there, everybody. This is George. Welcome to my podcast. This is number 122. This is a very special podcast for two reasons. One, it's special because it's the first podcast I've ever done where the entire podcast is dedicated to an interview. I won't be focusing on a feature creature. I won't be able to answer any of the questions submitted by the listeners. So that's one reason why. But the other reason why it's a special podcast is because of the man we're getting ready to hear that I interviewed, and that is Professor Larry Witmer. He is one of the top scientific minds in the world. This man is incredibly smart, and the reason why it's so special for me is because I have been an admirer of his work for decades, and I've thought so highly of him, and I had the opportunity several years ago to actually meet him and interview him in person. And when you meet your heroes, it's always scary because you see them on TV and you sometimes apply certain qualities to a person that maybe they don't have. Maybe he's not as nice as you think he or she is going to be, or maybe they are not going to be the person that you've envisioned in your mind. But I am happy to say that when I met Dr. Witmer, he was all of that and more for me. He was so kind and he's so courteous. And the amount of work that he has done for paleontology and just for science in general is staggering. So I'm going to post on my my podcast page, which is dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com, and also on my Facebook page, the Dinosaur George page, or my personal page, which is George Blassing, Blasing. I'm going to post links to all of the associated websites that Dr. Witmer is associated with, both his professional website, and then he has a series of YouTube videos with a tremendous amount of information. And then the most exciting is the one that links you to Witmer Lab. Witmer Lab is there's so much information on that site. I can't begin to tell you enough how you've got to go and check it out. So I'm going to take a little breather, and then we are going to kick off that interview. And I assure you it's going to be something you won't forget. It was fantastically fun to do it. So let's take a quick commercial and then we'll jump right into the interview.
Do you or someone you know like prehistoric life? Are you looking for that perfect gift for the dinosaur lover in your family? Our web store is filled with hundreds of replica claws, teeth, skulls, and more. Start a collection of your favorite animals today. Tyrannosaurus teeth, raptor claws, ice-aged mammal skulls, and more can be found in our catalog. Our prices are very affordable, and we don't add hidden or excessive shipping or handling charges. Visit us at store.dinosaurgeorge.com.
I've admired the work of our guest for more than a decade. His contributions to science are so vast, we could dedicate 3 shows to him and still not cover everything he's accomplished. Dr. Larry Witmer is a professor of anatomy and a Chang Ying-Chien professor of paleontology at the Department of Biomedical Sciences at the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine in Ohio University. Dr. Witmer, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, George. I'm so happy to be able to chat with you today.
I'm thrilled that you were able to make time. And for everybody listening, I want you to know this is being recorded on a Saturday. So to get anyone to work on a Saturday is a miracle. As busy as you are, I'm amazed you were able to even give us that.
Yeah, well, my wife would probably rather me work not so often on Saturdays. I'm often in here poking around in the lab and doing stuff. So wow. Happy to be here. I'm here anyways.
See, most wives would pay me money if I could get their husbands out of the house on a weekend. So.
Yeah, well, but it works out okay.
Yeah. Now, you are a Chang Ying-Chien professor of paleontology. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, what that refers to is the fact that I am a named professor. It's an endowed professorship. And this woman, Chang Ying-Chien, or Ying-Chien, as we knew her around here, was a woman who has since passed away a few years ago. And she was a lover of paleontology and a lover of dinosaurs. She was actually more of a mathematician by trade. She was associated with Ohio University. But she was one of these people that would follow everything in paleontology, watch all the shows, read all the magazine articles. She'd also sign on to digs around the globe. So she actually collected dinosaurs with Phil Curry and Bob Bacher and all kinds of other folks. She sort of took a liking to me and would come into my laboratory and on a regular basis, and eventually she wound up, in a sense, writing me into her will or my laboratory. And so I am proud to regard myself as the Chang Professor of Paleontology. She was a wonderful woman and a great friend to the science and a personal friend of mine.
Wow, to make that big of an impact on somebody that had met so many people and sounds like she had the opportunity to do things that most of us just dream of, you've got to be honored. I imagine you've got to be incredibly honored for something like that. Yeah, she was a wonderful person, and I'm thrilled to have known her. That's amazing. So before we get into your career, I would like to talk just about you. Can you kind of share us a little bit of information about you, maybe where you grew up, your family, anything that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I'm sort of a regular, pretty normal American suburban guy. Grew up in one of the suburbs of Rochester, New York, in upstate New York, a town called Henrietta. With three older sisters, and so I was the only boy. I was the youngest. My folks, both of them are still living in the house that I grew up in. They're both 83 and doing well. And so I grew up. I like to say I grew up in the mid-Devonian, which sometimes feels like some days. But those were the rocks that I spent a lot of time in, Ordovician and Devonian rocks, rocks that are much older than the age of dinosaurs. And I collected all kinds of things like brachiopods and trilobites and things like that. And so, that was back in the days when kids would go out and disappear outside for long periods of time, which seems to happen less these days.
Boy, you're not kidding.
Yeah. So I was always out, in nature, thinking about the present and dreaming about the past. I always had a passion for dinosaurs, like a lot of kids do. It was a lot harder back then. I mean, there were, some books, but, there weren't, TV documentaries and things like that. There was no internet. And so unless you went to a museum, you basically went to the library. And maybe your folks would buy you some toys and things like that, which mine did. So, it was sort of a passion for dinosaurs led to a passion for science and knowledge and learning about things. And that passion for dinosaurs never really left. And so as I went through my training, went through high school and did all kinds of stuff like people do. I was in sports and had jobs and things like that. But I was always interested in academics. And then when I got into college, I went to college at Cornell University in upstate New York and spent a lot of time in geology. I worked with Professor John Cisney, who's an emeritus professor there. We still keep in touch, which is amazing. I worked for him in his lab in the 70s. But I was a major in biology. And when I talked to lots of young people, kids that are interested in sort of, how to become a paleontologist, the classic question is, are you going to biology or are you going to go into geology? And the reality is that paleontology seems to sit kind of in between the two. For me, I was always interested in how the animals lived their lives. What were they like as living, breathing animals? And that's sort of biology. And so I wound up getting all of my degrees in biology, a bachelor's, a master's at Kansas, and a PhD at Johns Hopkins Medical School, all in biology. But at all the places I went, all the universities, I always took all of the geology courses because I know that, my fossils are found in these rocks, and the rocks can tell us a great deal about the animals. And so, that trajectory led me to where I am. And so I've been, basically a biologist with, one foot in the present and the other foot back in the Mesozoic. And that was sort of my journey to where I am now.
Wow. Now, does anybody in your family, either your parents or your sisters, is anyone else in any sort of profession that you're in at all? Were they associated with that? Or are you the only one in the family?
I'm pretty much the only one. My dad was a chemical engineer by trade, and in Rochester, New York, if you're a chemical engineer, you're probably working for the Eastman Kodak Company, which people may remember was a company that made cameras and film and photographic paper.
Sure.
And so he was, certainly scientifically minded. I don't know if he would call himself a scientist, but to my young mind, he certainly seemed to be a scientist. One of my uncles was a biologist. My uncle Ted Wohnsiedler, who was a professor. So it wasn't a completely foreign notion to me. And all my sisters went to college, and that was sort of the expectation that I would go to college and do something,
right.
Make something of myself, hopefully. But actually, there was probably, if anything, there was, lots of music in the house as much as science. And so that is about as much of an influence in my life as was the science.
Well, it's funny you mentioned music, because in my interview notes, I wrote 2 words down when I first wanted to interview you, and I laugh every time I read them. One is pinky and one is guitars. So first, who the heck is Pinky?
Pinky is our cat. Pinky is our little cat. My wife Patty and I have had, and my son Sam have had Pinky for a number of years now, and we've had cats over the years. And us getting Pinky sort of corresponded with us getting on Facebook, and so Pinky has been featured quite prominently on Facebook. And even on our Witmer Lab Facebook page, when she was a tiny little kitten, I actually brought her into my research lab and just let her crawl around. So this is tiny little kitten, like 6 or 7 weeks old. She was actually too young. She actually should have been with her mother. But that's how we got her from the shelter. And so as she was just roaming around the lab, crawling amongst all these dinosaur skulls, I took some pictures of her. And so it's not too uncommon on a #Fossil Friday that I'll break out one of those pictures of Pinky crawling around some dinosaur skull as a kitten. And I'll tell you, if you want to break the internet, combine kittens and dinosaurs, and that kind of stuff is always pretty popular.
Well, that's where I had seen. And for everybody listening, I will put links on my podcast page, dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com. I'll put links to Dr. Witmer's Facebook pages, especially Witmer Lab, which we'll go into in a little while, which is amazing. But that's where I saw Pinky, which I laughed. I have a cat named Meatloaf, and so I absolutely love this cat. And people who think that cats don't have personalities have never had a cat, apparently.
Yeah, you got that right. Yeah.
So now something else I see on your personal web page, or on your personal Facebook page, is your interest in guitars. Do you play, or do you just find them interesting?
Well, I got a whole bunch of them, so I hope I play.
Nice.
That would be pretty sad if I just collected them. So yes, I've been playing guitar for a long time, and it is a passion of mine. I play, every single day. I've got 2 guitars sitting here right in my office. There's another guitar in my research lab, and there's too many at home. It's almost embarrassing. But I enjoy playing guitar. I have lots of electric guitars and some acoustic guitars. And, when I was in college and grad school, I was in bands and stuff like that. And I'm I'm really too busy now to be in bands. I'd be a lousy band member because I'd always be missing rehearsal because I've got some grant deadline or something I've got to do. But I still find time for myself to play.
So what genre of music do you like? Do you like jazz? Do you like what do you like?
Yeah, I like jazz. I probably would say that blues music is closest to my heart. That's what I play a lot of, and it's something that I do a lot. I'll do it, very often late at night when I'm done working and just relaxing, and it's typically one of the first things I do in the morning and one of the last things I do at night.
Wow.
Is play guitar, and I think it helps lower my blood pressure and keeps me grounded, and reminds me of one of the things that I value, which is music. So I'm never too far from music, and it's great to be able to make music. It's sort of this myth that scientists are these sort of these guys with these people with test tubes and lab coats, and even in the paleontology world, they have the reputation of being these scruffy people that are traipsing around the Badlands, thinking about scientific things. The reality is that science itself is a tremendously creative endeavor. In that when you're thinking about science, and even if it's something like chemistry or physics, it takes real creativity to come up with sort of an elegant experimental design, or to have the insight to think about how to pose questions that we as scientists can answer. And in the realm of paleontology, it really does take a lot of creativity to really interpret the fossils that we get out of the ground. And so it shouldn't be surprising. It's surprising to some people, but many of my scientific colleagues are incredibly creative people that are musicians or painters or have some sort of creative side of their life that are involved in basically what we'd call the arts. And so it shouldn't be a surprise, but that's often a surprise. That scientists are people too. And science is really a very creative thing, and so that creativity sort of spills out into all aspects of our lives.
Well, that's one of the things that I found frustrating is, you're right, people have this idea of paleontologists as people that first don't want to be spoken to by anybody. They want to be in their own world. They want to live in the desert. They only come into town periodically to buy 50-pound bags of rice and beans, and then they go back out and they live and they never see the public. And as you get to know people like you, like for instance, when I had the chance to meet you personally, you're right. There's so much within the science, and yet what frustrates me is most television shows, and mine was guilty of this as well, stick you on a chair, ask you bullet point questions, don't get to know who you are, just get to know what you study. And I find it refreshing when there's someone, you're a perfect example. Here's somebody that plays the guitar. Most young people listening to this their mouth is going to fall open. Oh my God, this man plays the guitar and it's electric too. Yes. So
I play loud too.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Oh man. Yeah. Dinosaurs, cats, and electric guitar loud. Man, we're going to break the internet. That's So before we get off the subject of you, one last question. Who are your favorite musicians?
Lots of folks. Eric Clapton was one of very important musician for me. I saw him when I was young, and I've seen him many times since. And he's an interpreter of the blues, and it was actually through Eric Clapton's music, and he was a part of the British invasion of the mid-'60s. He's over 70 now, but it was one of these things where I came to blues music through Eric Clapton, and then through him I found his influences, which were many of the African-American recording artists from the 20s and 30s, people like, Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and folks like that. And so I've listened to all that kind of music. and I still do. But I still listen to lots of rock and roll and lots of music that's made today. I listen to music that's is fresh as can be, like Bruno Mars or Lady Gaga or Beyonce. I'll do all that too. So
wow,
it's all good.
That's neat. If somebody ever looked at my record collection, because I still have records, if they looked at my record collection, they would wonder, there must be 7 different people living in this household, because how could anybody listen to that variety of music? But I'm like you, I have an appreciation for in some cases lyrics, in other cases lyrics. If you really listen to lyrics, there are so many amazing things. Your mouth just falls open when you come to the realization is, we hear a song and we sing along and we don't really give thought to that song until you don't understand the lyrics. So you go online and you look it up and you read all of them. You go, oh my God, this isn't what I thought this song was about. This is remarkable. But what a thing to be able to be a musician and stir that kind of emotion in people. And I'm the same way with you. I was not a fan of Lady Gaga only because I didn't listen to her music. But when I saw her, remember when she got up and sang songs from The Sound of Music?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My jaw fell open and I went, my God, this generation hasn't had that kind of magnificent voice. And then I started listening to her music. And somebody else that I did was Amy Winehouse. I never was a fan, only because my stupid mind, I only saw images. And of course, they were the most disrespectful images. And when you looked at it, you went, oh, what a mess. I'm not going to be interested. And then you realize first, she was dealing with issues. But then if you just listen to the voice, she was pretty spectacular. So
absolutely.
I've expanded mine. I expand mine the same way. And yeah, it's amazing. So now your career, good Lord, I don't even know where to start because of all the different things that you do. And, I subscribe to a variety of different websites, and what I do is I look for the latest papers to come out because I'm always looking for somebody to interview, some new discovery or something interesting, and I'm trying to give some focus on or some attention to people that may not always get it. I'm going through and I see these, and I always see the list of who wrote the papers and whose names are associated. Yours has gotten to the point where I think people are just adding your name just for the bump in popularity. So let's break your career kind of into a couple of things. Let's start first of all with your role as a professor of anatomy. Now, I've always referred to you as Professor Witmer. Other people prefer to you as Dr. Witmer. So what is the difference between a professor and someone who is a doctor of something?
Yeah, that's a fine question. I actually tend not to use, we call those things like professor or doctor or Mr. honorifics. And I've always implored you to call me Larry. And I'm not a huge fan of honorifics. A lot of folks like them. I tend to have the people I work with just call me by my name, which is my first name, which is fine. A professor is very much an academic thing. So when people go into university life, you get hired by a college. You typically are hired as an assistant professor, and then from there you are promoted to an associate professor. And then finally, if you're hopefully successful enough, you will get promoted to be a full professor or a professor. And so that is sort of a university hierarchy. But typically the doctor thing is if once you get a PhD or a degree like that, a terminal degree like a PhD, then you can call yourself doctor. To be honest, I actually tend not to call myself doctor partly because I work in medical schools where there are what most people would consider real doctors, which are physicians. And so if there's an honorific that applies to me, I always kind of prefer professor. But a lot of the med students that I teach will call me Dr. Witmer, and that's fine. It's accurate, and certainly I don't. Although I tend not to use doctor for myself, many of my colleagues do, and that's fine. It's an honorific that they have well earned. So.
Well, it's funny because, yes, you actually yelled at me and told me to stop calling you Professor Witmer. The the reason why I do that, and for especially all of you young people, I like for people when they meet someone like you to demonstrate respect for what you've accomplished, because to get to become a doctor, it's not something they hand out when you walk into school. It takes a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of hard work. And I can appreciate that you feel more comfortable with your students and people calling you by your first name. But for young people to meet you for the first time, it is very important for all of you young people to understand that when somebody is a professor or somebody is a doctor, that's a representation of a tremendous amount of hard work. And so you refer to them initially as doctor or professor. And then if you're given the opportunity or told, please call me Larry, then you do. Unfortunately, I just couldn't break that habit. And finally in that email, you were like, look, you got to knock that stuff off. So anyway.
Yep. No, yeah, but you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's appropriate to approach people with and speak to them using the respectful terms that they have earned. Something we lack in English that Spanish has that's really handy is they have a verb that's called tutearse. Tuteame means to speak to me in the familiar form, which is the to form. And we don't have that in English. An actual set of words that sort of just says, go ahead and refer to me in a familiar way rather than a formal way. And so English could use that, but we don't have that.
well, maybe there's your next project. You have nothing else going on. So now you can start affecting the English language. You might as well. You've affected anatomy and paleontology so much. Now you can go to the next one, start changing words. So as a
do that too.
So as a professor of anatomy, explain to us what your class is about.
Yeah, well, it's surprising to a lot of people. So I actually got my I've been in medical schools for basically 30 years, which a lot of people find really surprising that a paleontologist would be in a medical school. And I actually got my PhD from Johns Hopkins Medical School. And I've been in medical schools ever since. And what I teach is the structure of the human body to medical students. And so I don't actually teach classes in paleontology. I teach undergraduates research in my lab, but the only teaching I do is actually what we call human gross anatomy to medical students. And the reason for that, and it's not as uncommon as you might think, the reality is that the study of the human body, human anatomy, isn't really a research thing anymore. We pretty much know how the human body is set up. All the muscles and nerves and blood vessels and things like that were named like 100 or 200 years ago. And so, but medical schools need to teach human anatomy to future physicians. And so to find people that have a passion for anatomical structure, how bodies are put together, and are accomplished scientists that can write publications and get federal grants, you need to find people that are studying the anatomy of other animals. And so, in fact, many medical schools actually hire paleontologists or physical anthropologists or people who study biomechanics to teach human anatomy to medical school. So I got my PhD at Johns Hopkins Medical School, where I studied with a great dinosaur paleontologist named Dave Weishampel. And there were lots of other paleontologists and physical anthropologists there. And that's true of our med school here. It's true of many med schools, Brown University, the Harvard MIT program, the University of Chicago, many medical schools, maybe surprisingly, maybe less surprisingly now, actually have their human anatomists are comparative anatomists or paleontologists or anthropologists. And so that's sort of how I got teaching human anatomy. And so in some respects, I know the structure of the human body better, way better than I know the structure of any dinosaur's body. I know humans inside and out, top to bottom. And it's actually not bad knowledge to have because most of my family and friends happen to be humans. And so it gives me some knowledge that's sort of useful to me. So
that works out really good.
Yeah, and it's sort of surprising to a lot of people, but once you think about it, it sort of makes sense. Med schools need scientists, and human anatomy really isn't a dedicated science anymore.
Wow. Well, you could study people in my family, and you would be able to study the earliest human life forms. So you could really become a specialist if you met some of my relatives.
I know what you're talking about.
So now, would most of your students, when you're dealing in the classroom, are they going to go on to become paleontologists, or are they going to go on to become medical doctors?
Well, the students that I teach in a sort of a classroom setting or a laboratory setting are trained to be physicians.
Right.
And so, in a sense, I've got a couple of sort of parallel lives in science, in the sense that I've got this medical education side, and I deal with physicians and hospitals and residency directors and things like that. But then I also have this other research side of my life, which is more in paleontology and biology. And so I've got a whole bunch of students on that side, too. Those are graduate students, people getting their doctoral degrees or PhD with me, as well as undergraduates. And in that case, we are actually, looking at things like dinosaurs and modern-day birds and crocodilians. And my graduate students are training to get their PhDs. And the undergraduates I work with, in many cases, are going to go off to graduate school themselves, maybe to get a PhD and become a professor, sort of like what I am. In other cases, I train undergrads that are going off to veterinary school, or even to med school. And so it's fairly broad training that we do, sort of even on the research side.
Well, the fun side for us, the side that I like of the work you do, is, of course, all of your work on the modern animals and the prehistoric. And when I had the pleasure of going up and interviewing you for the History Channel Jurassic Fight Club series, we got a chance to go in to your lab, which was amazing. And we also got to go with you to watch you use a CT scanner. So can you explain first what is the scanner, and then describe what it is you're using it for?
Sure. Now, CT scanners are, that term CT refers to computed tomography. It used to be called computed axial tomography, which is CAT, or CAT scans. And so you'll hear CAT scanners a lot too. And they're basically the same thing, CAT scanners, CT scanners. These are X-ray devices that are used in hospital settings to peer inside patients to see what's going on. Actually, going back to music, one thing that's sort of interesting is that I often say that the Beatles actually invented CAT scanning. And the reason for that is that the parent company for the Beatles' Apple Records was a company called EMI. And one of the things that EMI was also doing was they hired a guy named Hounsfield who actually invented CT scanning. In fact, won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for inventing CT scanning. But a lot of the money for the research and development of CT scanning actually came from the Beatles. And so just a little connection there between the music and the science. But what CT scans do, we sort of regard that as something that's called non-invasive, meaning that although the X-rays go through the patient, there's no scalpels or anything like that. No real harm is done to the patient other than having some X-rays go through them. And it allows you to sort of look inside the body and look at the organs, look right through the skin. From a paleontological standpoint, that can be really informative too, because the X-rays can actually look through the rock in many cases to let us see what's going on with the bones inside. And so just like like a physician will use CT scanners to see what's going on inside a patient, our team will use CT scanners to see what's going on inside the body of an animal that's living today, because we look at lots of different animals today, like alligators and ostriches and things like that we've run through the CT scanner. But we've also CT scanned many different extinct animals, many different dinosaurs. And I've been working at Ohio Health Oblenis Hospital here in Athens, Ohio, for over 20 years. And most of that time I've been working with someone named Heather Rockhold, who's a senior radiation technologist there who, she's been such a research partner. She was actually there with us when we were filming for Jurassic Fight Club as well. And so she was, and she's still working there. And so we worked together and have scanned so many different dinosaurs. My guess is that Heather has scanned more dinosaurs than any other hospital person probably on the planet.
Wow. Now she the one that when we were there, we were in that small room looking through that window? Was she the one in there working running the machine from in there?
Yep, absolutely.
I remember her.
And she's been on. She was, in Jurassic Fight Club in the background in some of those scenes, and she's been on. I actually think our hospital, Ohio Health Oblenis Hospital, has probably been featured on more television documentaries than any other single hospital because we've done a lot. We've done a lot there, and so and so she knows a lot, and that's the thing that is really important. Is that's a piece of technology, a CT scanner, that it really takes somebody that's very knowledgeable in order to really get the most out of that machine. And so when we're CT scanning T-Rex, that's very different than CT scanning your grandmother. These are very different subjects. And so you have to, in a sense, drive the CT scanner differently when you're scanning a patient than when you're scanning a fossil. And Heather has the knowledge to do that really, really well. And so she's been a great partner, and the hospital has been a great partner to me and Ohio University for over 20 years.
Well, how did you ever grow or begin to put together the idea of using a CT scanner with dinosaurs? Had that been done before and you just kind of improved upon it, or was that something that was not very common back when you started?
Yeah, I wasn't the first, but I was probably among the early people doing it a lot. And so there was a time when I would submit federal grants for research funds, and I would say, I'm going to CT scan these things. And people would go, ooh, that's amazing. We should fund this grant. Nowadays, if you're not CT scanning something, you're just never going to get the grant. Everybody does it now. But early on, it was something that was pretty special. And the reason why I really wanted to do that is partly because I have approached all of our questions about the past, about dinosaurs, as a biologist. And so if we think about a dinosaur fossil, the bones and teeth, these are the things that we have left after all of these millions of years, after time has basically stripped away all of the biology, all of the soft tissues, all of the physiology, all of the behavior. And so I really, at my core, think my job is basically to flesh out dinosaurs all over again, to see what the bones can tell us about all of those things that time has stripped away, the muscles, the blood vessels, the nerves, the brains, the things that actually clothe and animate those bones. And so whenever I look at, say, a skull, maybe most people just see, an eye socket and the teeth. What I see are holes where blood vessels and nerves are coming out. I see cavities where air sinuses and brains are located. I see spaces where jaw muscles are attaching. And so, previously, that I was just seeing all that stuff in my head. Now that we have CT scans, we can start to not just peer through the rock and peer through the bone to see what those canals and cavities are like, but by CT scanning, we also bring that physical object, that dinosaur fossil or whatever it is, into a computer environment, because that's what a CT scanner does. It basically captures every point in 3D space and brings it into a computer. And once it's in a computer, then our team can really go to town. So CT scanning for us is just the beginning. 20 years ago, all we wanted to do with a CT scanner was look inside. Now we look at CT scanners as a way to capture an object, to bring that 3D object into a computer, like a dinosaur skull, where we can do things to it. We can start to figure out what the brain was like, put the brain back in place within the brain cavity, fill up all of those canals with blood vessels and nerves. We can now, with some of the computer simulation software we do, we can restore what the jaw muscles were like and then actually make them work to get those muscles to contract within sort of this virtual, CG, computer-generated environment. And so it's really been a game changer to allow us to really start to test hypotheses about extinct animals. For example, one of my former PhD students, a guy named Jason Burke, who's down at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh, his dissertation project was actually to model airflow through the noses of dinosaurs and their modern day relatives. He used a complicated computer engineering program called computational fluid dynamics, which sounds very impressive, but what it allowed us to do was to model airflow through the noses of dinosaurs so that we could understand how they breathed and how they smelled. And other of my team members, my students, former students, are studying patterns of blood flow through the head. So we're actually tracing blood vessels like arteries and veins and that are allowing us to understand heat exchange, how these dinosaurs were able to keep their brains cool and to get rid of heat when they were overheated. And so all of these different pieces sort of fit together, looking at modern day animals to see how they're put together, and then using CT scanning and computer visualization and computer simulation to sort of run engineering approaches to see how these animals worked. How hard could they bite? How did they breathe? How did they keep themselves cool? And so it's been really quite a journey to sort of figure out how these dinosaurs worked, how we can get a glimpse into the past by using these modern tools of medicine and the animals that are around us today, the modern-day relatives of dinosaurs.
God. Well, when an untrained person like myself looks at a dinosaur skull, we either see that it's completely encased in rock and they're simply cutting away all the rock to expose the skull. How are you able to see something that isn't there? The brain isn't there anymore, right? So yep. How is it that you can do all these things that you just described when to a person like myself, it's just a rock where the soft stuff used to be?
Yeah, well, it's hard, and you have to be careful. You have to try not to, read too much into it. But what is exciting is that once you start spending a lot of time in the modern time plane, the plane that we live in, we have lots of animals in our research lab that we get from all over the world, mostly the United States, but all over the world, of animals modern-day animals that have passed away. We don't kill any animals in our laboratory, but the reality is animals are dying all over the world. And one of the things I've been able to do is to find ways that we can get a hold of their bodies. We work a lot with wildlife rehabilitation people that sometimes are not able to rehabilitate animals that are injured, and so they will be humanely put to sleep or euthanized. And then we get these animal carcasses, and in a sense, we then give them an afterlife. They have a life after death in science and education. And what we can do then is that we can do CT scanning, but we also do lots of dissection where we use scalpels and scissors and dig into these animals and find out how their blood vessels and nerves make canals and grooves within the bones, how muscles will pull up little ridges and little depressions in the bones called muscle scars, and how the brain forms itself and pushes into the bones of the brain cavity. It turns out that all of these soft tissues, these muscles and blood vessels and air sinuses and brains, all of these soft tissues, in a sense, write their signatures into the bone. And so one of the things our team has really been trying to understand over the years is basically the language of soft tissues. How do they write their presence into the bone? And once we can understand that language, then we can go into the past, and then we can start to read the bones of the dinosaurs and see what they're telling us about the soft tissues that were running through and wrapping around those bones. And so now when we look at a dinosaur skull that's sitting in the museum, for me, I just see blood vessels and muscles and eyeballs and nostrils and, wattles and combs on their heads, all of these soft tissue features. And it turns out that the bones themselves actually tell us a lot about those biological soft tissues that rotted away, over 66 million years ago.
Man, that is absolutely phenomenal. And with the technology improvements that have occurred from when you first started, or let's say when CT scanning first started, I suspect now you can look at things that they never dreamed of being able to see.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the kind of thing that with the modern technology, we can really start to sort of flesh these guys out to restore these extinct animals and their functions, within a computer environment. The interesting thing is that you kind of have to do all those pieces. So we do some stuff that's sort of, at the one end, it's the highest of the high tech. But we also do stuff that's kind of the lowest of the low tech. I mean, I drive around in my car with a bunch of plastic bags, and we'll drive off the road and pick up some roadkill, and we'll bring it back into the lab, and we'll take it apart, with basically knives. We do some of the stuff with, we could basically use stone tools like a caveman to do some of our science. And so really all of that is part of the process. You can't just use the computers. You can't just use a scalpel. You kind of have to use all of those tools, and all of that has to be threaded with this notion of evolution and how evolution occurs. It's evolution that ties all of these pieces together and helps us understand how all of these threads, whether the threads are of a T-Rex or an alligator or a bird that's at your feet or in your backyard, all of these threads are part of the evolutionary tapestry. And so we can use all of these tools, but we need to interpret these pieces of evidence, these different threads in that evolutionary tapestry, to help us build up that whole picture of how T-Rex and Velociraptor relate to a cardinal or a swan or an alligator. And all of those animals are linked together, and it's sort of our job to try to figure out how those animals fit together and help us give us a picture of how life has evolved on our planet.
Wow. With technology, what it is today, so many people can simply draw and bring to life, if that's the best term, anything they want. And so I think sometimes people misunderstand that the work that you guys are doing is not conjecture and it's not done for entertainment. It is based on a tremendous amount of research and work, being very careful to make sure that you're not simply creating a video game for kids to play. You're creating something that scientists can use. And what amazes me about it is that you're willing to share so much of it to the public. It just, that's amazing.
That's key. And you're right. It's really important for us as scientists the term we often use is to stay within your data. In other words, there are many things that we want to know about the past, but there are limits to what we can know. And so it's important as we as scientists try to paint a picture of the past, we have to be careful that we're not trying to paint with too fine a brush. In other words, there are many things that we can know, and there are many things that we can't know. We as scientists need to know the things that we can know. An artist or a filmmaker or somebody like that, they often need to make up things that we don't know, and I understand that. And we as scientists often really want to know a lot of those things too. But part of the discipline of being a scientist is to ask questions that can be answered. There is no limit to the number of questions that we can ask, but if we can't really answer those, then it starts to go into the realm of science fiction. And so to a certain extent, I sort of see our job at a very broad level is to try to discover the questions that we can answer. Technology has turned out to allow us to answer a whole lot more questions than we could before. And also framing questions in the right way allow us to answer more questions. And so that's where that creativity comes in again, where you can figure out how to do that. And one of the things, as you mentioned, one of the things that we've been trying to do for years is to share that scientific process, how we learn what we learn, with as many people as we can. Because at one point, knowing a lot of things, the facts about dinosaurs or birds or crocodiles or lizards or whatever, that's all well and good. But how we know what we know, how do we learn about the present and the past, that is something that's, in a sense, even more important. Certainly nowadays, when there's so much surrounding us that really requires us to understand how science works and how important science is in general, that understanding science and how science works is actually, more important than the really cool stuff that we're learning about dinosaurs. And so we want people to know that, but we also really want people to understand how science works.
See, that brings up a great point, because we're at a point in this nation and maybe the world where we sometimes dismiss things of science because we don't understand them. And what we need are more scientists to explain how we arrive at what we do. Now, I'm saying we, not including myself. I mean, if I were a scientist, what I'm saying is, what I like about what you do is you put in this tremendous amount of work, and your work is available to the common person. They can simply go to your website, your lab website. And again, for everybody, I'll post that link because it's very important to go. When you go, you as an individual have an understanding of all the things you're doing to get there. I find it frustrating that for some scientists, they become frustrated trying to explain to people how they arrived at their thing, and they become almost dismissive, which I think causes even more trouble, because once you fail to convince the public of the science behind your announcements, then it's hard to ever get them back in. And I see that right now with climate change, where it's people just simply think, well, that guy gets paid to come up with these numbers. And rather than saying, well, then you're a denier, that doesn't fix anything. I think we need more ways to share with the general public the science behind what you do, so that if somebody walks up to me and I have a replica of a Tyrannosaurus Rex skull, the first thing they say is, how do you know? Or I have a replica of a brain. They say, how do you know that's what it is? Well, I can sit down and say, there are paleontologists who actually use CT scanners to scan the skull cavity, the brain case, and the spot where the brain used to be can be differentiated. And you explain it that way, and they walk away going, man, that's incredible. But if I said, well, there it's in front of you, figure it out yourself, well, then that individual would assume I simply made it up out of whole cloth and didn't have any science behind it. So what I love about your lab and the way you share what you do through your YouTube videos and your lab website, it is everybody listening, you've got to go to those places and see that. And we'll talk a little bit in a second about your YouTube series and a little more detail about your lab. But the one thing I wanted to mention, and this I laugh every time I think about this, when we got to go visit you in your lab and you were walking around showing us your lab, you opened up this gigantic door to what looked like a giant freezer. And I think there was half of a rhinoceros inside. Is that a common thing for Professor Larry Witmer to have to worry about where to move things around because he's got to fit a rhinoceros in his cooler?
Yeah, no, we've got all that stuff in there. We've got a walk-in cooler. We have all kinds of coolers or in freezers. We've got our walk-in freezer has all kinds of crocodiles and there's a couple of rhinos in there and giraffe parts, giraffe heads and these are all animals that all died for other reasons. They died of a disease, or in some cases we have animals that suffered being hit by a car or some sort of fisherman's line for a pelican or something like that, and so these animals pass away and they find their way to our freezer. It's actually a nice thing that we have lots of people that have heard that, in a sense, our team can put these animals to good use. Some animals that have sometimes died, sadly, for reasons that relate to human activity, not necessarily somebody, brutally shooting or hurting the animals, but die because of what we humans do. We drive in cars, or we have fishing operations or things like that where animals can die. It's nice that these animals can then, in a sense, have this extra life. But I absolutely agree that this notion that we need to help people understand how science works really is vital. It's not really necessarily just about dinosaurs and helping people understand dinosaurs. I sort of feel like we can use the interest that people have in dinosaurs, and it cuts across. It's not just kids. It's all ages, as you well know. We can use dinosaurs in a sense as a vehicle to talk to people about science and make people less afraid of science. It's one of these things that we have, that people think that science is hard. I know, George, that you spend so much time working with children, and children are all scientists. They all start out as scientists. They actually probe the natural world around them. They experiment all the time. The parents are running around freaking out because kids are putting things in their mouths and tasting things and poking at things. That is what a scientist does. We might not necessarily put stuff in our mouths. Our parents taught us not to do that too. But it's that kind of experimentation, hypothesis testing that kids do all the time. And kids are fearless when it comes to learn new things. But as we get older, I think it's we grown-ups that, in a sense, beat that out of them. We get the sense that we tell people, oh, that science and mathematics, that's hard, or that it's not for girls. I mean, we're still doing that.
Yes.
And it's crazy. And we need our populace to not necessarily to be scientists, but to be not afraid of science. So much around us relates to science. It relates to not just climate change, but debates about, vaccinations and all kinds of things. Require some knowledge, or at least less of a fear of science or mistrust of science. All of these technological advances are ultimately around science. And so certainly what we try to do, and I'm thrilled that we actually have, so many women working in our lab. We've got most of the students in our lab right now actually happen to be women, and so we're starting to break out of some of this stuff. We're getting better as a culture at bringing science in early in kids training, and we're doing much better about not telling girls that science is just for boys. And so the future looks bright, but it's something that we have to be very attentive to, and particularly nowadays when it seems like there's some significant challenges to science, and not just science, but curiosity. And so that's part of some of these outreach efforts that we try to do, is to try and help just encourage people to be curious about the world around them and try to help people understand that we can understand how things work.
Right.
And if we can help do that, then that's, I think, helping some larger good.
Very much so. And the climate right now is one of uncertainty, because once science is used as a political tool on either side of the political spectrum, it muddies the water for the work being done. And so I hope that we have more of an emphasis on sharing with the public that the amount of work going behind it is what drives the results. It's not, if you're somebody that dislikes black rhinos and all your work just says, yeah, these animals were no good for the environment, the end. Well, people that agree with you cheer you and go, that's a great finding. But that's not based on science. That's based on your personal opinion. What you guys are doing is, here is the evidence in front of us. Here is the result. And whether I personally thought it was, for instance, I remember one time you guys did something about the placement of the nostrils. The proposed placement of the nostrils may have been inaccurate, on Diplodocus, for instance.
Yep.
And I remember you telling me, because I said, boy, that's going to change a lot. And your opinion was, well, this isn't definitive, but even if it does, it doesn't match my version of what I thought it should look like. And that to me immediately said, that's an example of a scientist. You had your own personal opinion of what you wanted it to look like, but based on your study, you hypothesized that may not be the case. That's what I think people don't understand, is you don't start off with a preconceived idea and you work to figure out what makes that idea function. It's the end result is irrelevant. When I get there, I got there.
Yep. And that's actually something that is one of the messages of science that really needs to be spread. This notion that, I have preconceived notions about all kinds of things. Why? Because I'm a person, and I've been brought up in culture. And so there are all of these things that we get as sort of received wisdom, things that's out there. People know things. And it turns out that a lot of the stuff that people know actually isn't really true. And that's one of the things as a scientist, is that we are trained to be skeptical. And when people say things, we sort of say, like, so what is the evidence for that? Is that, in fact, true? Are those actual facts, or are those based on evidence? And so that kind of thinking, which is scientific thinking, is the kind of thinking that we all should have. We should always be requesting the evidence for whatever it is that is actually true. And that's what science helps train us to do. But that kind of desire to know how things work and why things are the way they are is core to science, but really is just how thought should be handled in any area of human endeavor.
Right. So explain the need for peer review. What is peer review, and explain why it's important to what you guys do?
Sure. Yeah. Peer review is it's sort of it's a jargon term that we use it's classically used in the context of scientific publication or technical publication, where your work is actually reviewed or looked at critically and closely by your peers, people that are like you or have similar kinds of training. So when we submit the results of our studies, we write them up in something called a manuscript that we submit to a journal for publication. That manuscript is sent off to other scholars who know something about the subject and can judge its worth. Is the science well done? Does the evidence match up? If there are numbers involved, are the statistics appropriate? And so this notion of peer review, where other scholars that have relevant knowledge critically evaluate something, is central to the operation of of science, or really just scholarship in general, because it's not just limited to science. Other areas also have this notion of peer review, and it's a good notion in the sense that it provides checks and balances. We're just nonsense hopefully doesn't find its way into common use because it is actually evaluated. And it's sort of what's interesting about the internet now is the possibility for review or peer review is possible on a grand scale. Typically with a journal editor will get a manuscript submitted, and they will receive a manuscript, and they will send it out to, anywhere from 2 to 6 people for review. You can put a notion on the internet, and it'll be critiqued fairly or unfairly, but potentially, dozens or hundreds or thousands of people. And so it's a different kind of peer review, but it's sort of out there. And so peer review is absolutely central to how science works in our world today.
Right, because it adds assurances that your personal bias, if you have one, isn't applied to what you are posting as saying this is what we know about this animal.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes science important. That's what I think people misunderstand. I think that some people see science as a club where if you're in it, we support you 100%, whatever you say, and let's all get together and let's all... I guess it's hard for people to understand that if you have a room with 100 scientists, they're not all best friends. They may be competition with you. They may be jealous of you. They may not like you on a personal level. So when you propose a paper and everybody in the room or the majority agrees with it, that they didn't agree because they're your buddy. They agreed because the science proved that what you are suggesting is the plausible answer.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's about evidence. I mean, sometimes we talk about, with the climate change, people talk about, that there's this broad consensus that 97% of scientists accept that climate change has occurred. And that's in fact true. But the reality is that the fact that there are 97% of scientists accept that fact is less important than the fact that the evidence shows it to be true. Things aren't really done by consensus, really. Things are done on the basis of evidence, because sometimes consensus can lead to what could be regarded as sort of unthinking orthodoxy. In other words, we think something is true because everybody thinks it. That's actually not scientific either. What's actually scientific is an evaluation of evidence. And the reality is that 97% of scientists have some notion of the evidence for climate change and have accepted that evidence pointing to the notion that there has been human-induced change in climate over the past, hundreds of years or millennia. And so it's sort of a subtle difference, but it winds up being important. It's ultimately about evidence.
Well, when you speak of evidence, one of the things that I love about paleontology is how many things that were one time thought to be the answer has been proven to be inaccurate or improved upon. And your work is an example. You are recognized as one of the foremost experts on soft tissue anatomy of the skull and extinct animals and dinosaurs and pterosaurs. So your work has gone to show that some of the things we thought we knew have now been changed because of technology and what you're doing. So let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff you've done with either dinosaurs, pterosaurs, or extinct animals. What are some of the highlights that you've had a chance to work on?
Well, it's really almost how a lot of these things fit together, because we've done so many different projects. We've done projects on brains and trying to understand the sensory capabilities of dinosaurs and their relatives. We did stuff on noses, and we're still doing stuff on noses and breathing, and the position of the nostrils that you mentioned before wound up being very important, because it, in a sense, gave us a glimpse of where the air comes into the nasal cavity. That turns out to be important in terms of how noses work. And so really what we're starting to do now is to start to put all of these different pieces together. So our work on jaw muscles that tells us about the feeding apparatus, we can now link that with information that we have on the nerves that are coming out of the brain and supplying those jaw muscles, or going to the skin where they're supplying sensory structures that are providing information about the environment around the animals. All of these different features we're really starting to get into in recent years, looking at the physiology of dinosaurs, vital functions, in particular how dinosaurs dealt with heat. We always have this notion that dinosaurs, were they cold-blooded or hot-blooded? Were they ectothermic or endothermic? The reality is that most of the really large dinosaurs were really hot-blooded. We often think about ways to keep dinosaurs warm, like feathers and things like that. But in fact, for many of the largest dinosaurs that are our size or larger, which is probably most of the dinosaurs, overheating was going to be a much bigger problem. Wow. And so our team has been looking for ways for how dinosaurs would have dealt with the high heat loads. How would they be able to get rid of heat? How would they be able to protect delicate sensory tissues like the eye or the brain itself from these high heat loads? If you think about a big sauropod dinosaur like Brachiosaurus or Diplodocus with this giant body that was just sitting out in the sun. I mean, these are animals that they're not finding shade, they're creating shade for the smaller animals. And so these big animals are just sitting out there absorbing the sun, and their bodies are heating up, and then this hot blood from the core goes up to the neck, and then potentially could fry the brain, basically. And admittedly, their brains aren't very large in some cases, but it's still their brain. And so we've been looking for ways for dinosaurs to be able to, in a sense, keep their brains cool. And that's how we've been getting into all of these different studies, looking at patterns of blood flow and patterns of airflow through the head. All of these different pieces start to allow us to put together a picture of how dinosaurs work, the physiology, how they were able to, in a sense, moderate these heat loads. But one of the things that's been sort of key for us is all of these different tissue types, whether it's muscles for the feeding apparatus, blood vessels, and nerves and brains and sinuses and air passageways, all of these tissues are sharing the space within the head. And so in recent years, what we've been trying to do is actually restore all of the soft tissues in the heads of dinosaurs all at once, so that we can actually see how all these different soft tissue systems are sharing the space within the skull. And it turns out that packaging, basically how do you pack all of those different soft tissues into the confined space of a skull, turns out that packing information tells us a lot about these different soft tissue systems. For example, it showed us that the jaw muscles of something like Diplodocus had to have been much thinner slips of muscles than what we had thought before, which then in turn showed us that Diplodocus could bite a whole lot less hard than what we had thought before, which in then turn tells us something about what this animal may have fed on. And so it's this sort of cascading set of things that we learn. We learn about the packaging, which tells us about the muscle size, which tells us about the bite force, which then tells us about what they ate. And so it's putting all of those pieces together that is sort of part of the scientific process. You can't just sort of jump all the way to what they might have eaten. You have to actually back all the way through there and find out, what are the soft tissues like? What are the muscles? How do they attach to the bones? And then you can sort of build things out from that. And so that's basically been, our major pattern. So we've had publications that have related to, the feeding apparatus of dinosaurs, as well as, the brain structure and the breathing structure and the blood vessels and physiology. And so all of these different pieces individually. They're individually, pretty interesting too. But they start to get really interesting when you start to put them together, because then you start to get like a whole animal. And that's sort of where we're heading. That's where we're trying to go. We're trying to flesh these guys out as completely as we can.
Man, one of the things that I've always liked the little ankylosaurs, or anything ankylosaurs, not little, but the ankylosaurs. And I remember reading in a book where it said that because they have a large nasal opening for their nose, they had a really good sense of smell. Have you been able to do any sort of research on ankylosaurs, and do the big noses, is that a result of just having a better sense of smell?
Yeah, we've done a lot on ankylosaurs, and they're very, very, very interesting. And so it was CT scanning actually that transformed that for us, because what we really need to do is be able to, their ankylosaurs are armored dinosaurs. That's the common name for them. And so they got armor covering their whole skull. And so you need something like the x-rays of a CT scan to peer inside the skull. And what I had thought, and actually what I had published 20 years ago, which has now turned out to be wrong, but that's okay, was I thought that the nose, the air went in the nose through the nostril, and then passed down into the throat, kind of like it does for you and me, with some sinuses, some air sinuses off to the side, like the sinuses that we have that get infected and give us sinus headaches and things like that. I thought that ankylosaurs were like that too. But when we did the CT scans, what myself and my chief collaborator, Ryan Ridgely, found is that actually there wasn't anything like what I had published on in 1997. I was wrong back then, because I didn't have X-ray vision. I kind of have. I'm kind of like Superman now. I have X-ray vision thanks to CT scanning. And so that allowed us to discover that ankylosaurs actually don't have a straight airway. They have a crazy, twisty, turny airway. We called it a crazy straw, like if you remember a kid's crazy straw.
Oh, yeah.
It went through all these different loops. That's actually what an ankylosaur nose is like. It goes through all of these twists and turns, and so it turns out it doesn't really have anything to do with the sense of smell. It turns out that they actually had a pretty good sense of smell, and we figured that out by looking at the structure of their brain. The area of the brain associated with processing odors is pretty big in ankylosaurs, as it turns out. But the nasal cavity is involved in something else. It's not necessarily just conducting smells to the back of the nose where the brain can smell them. It turns out that this big crazy straw, this highly tortuous airway, actually relates probably to physiology, to the way that these animals dealt with heat. Once again, we discovered that there were large blood vessels that passed right next to where all of that twisty-turny airway was going. And so it gave lots of opportunities for blood to be heated or cooled, and for the air to be heated or cooled. And so as these animals inhaled through that crazy straw nose, the air that was passing down to their lungs was progressively warmed and became more humid, more humidified, which is important for the breathing function that takes place in the lungs. But as they breathed out, the air actually was actually sort of cooled as it went out, and it actually cooled the blood during inhalation, that the blood that was actually on its way going to the brain. And so what we discovered is that ankylosaurs, and in fact lots of different dinosaurs, basically have air conditioners in their nose. And these air conditioners allow heating or cooling to take place, which is important for breathing. But what it also does, sort of like water flows through an old-fashioned radiator, the blood that was running through the nose as well was also cooled. And then that cooled blood could then go back and help keep the brain from being fried because of their large bodies. And so it turned out that by looking at the nose of dinosaurs, we did learn something about the sense of smell, but we also learned about their breathing, and we also learned about how they dealt with heat and kept from overheating. And so, which we wouldn't have been able to do unless we had a CT scanner.
God, how amazing, though. How amazing to be able to go from early paleontologists simply having such limited opportunity to form their hypothesis. And it was a good one when you look at it, because you'd assume big nostrils, big sense of smell, the end. Boy, that's exciting. Now, have you had any opportunity to help figure out the function of the plates on Stegosaurus? Have you done any work on them yet?
No, our team hasn't, but other folks have. And certainly if you just look at the plates, we know some things, which is that those plates definitely played a role in display. I mean, they're these big, very showy things. And so, and we know enough about the brain and the eyesight of Stegosaurus that, it absolutely could see those plates. And so those were certainly visual signals of something, whether it was age or sex or certainly species, which species of stegosaur it might be. But one thing that's also very interesting is we can tell that there's lots of blood vessels associated with those. There was blood on the outside, and there was blood running through the inside of those things. And so the question has been, did Stegosaurus have those to help change its body temperature? And the reality is that almost certainly it had some effect on their body temperature, almost certainly. They almost couldn't have prevented it simply because the blood was flowing through them and the plates were exposed to the sun, potentially heating the blood, but also opposed to breezes that would actually maybe carry some of the heat from the hot blood from the body, would actually carry it away. And so we now have a sense that those plates on the back of Stegosaurus almost certainly had something to do with their thermal biology, which is a way to say how they dealt with heat. I mean, people used to think that those plates were for protection because they sort of ran along the back, maybe might protect the spinal cord running through the backbone. The reality is those plates, if anything, were the kind of thing that would be a nice, tasty, bloody cookie for an Allosaurus or something like that. So not a whole lot of protection provided by those, but they almost certainly performed really potentially a number of functions, and lots of structures serve multiple functions. We can sort of think about a Stegosaurus plates may have been sort of like the ears of an elephant. An elephant's ears are very important for display. They can move their ears forward and make their bodies look even bigger than they are, which is a very important threat display. But there are lots and lots of blood vessels passing through the ears of elephants, and they flap their ears to help dissipate heat. And so, and in some respects, we could sort of think of Stegosaurus plates, maybe not flapping, but doing those same two functions. They're going to be important for display and communicating information, but also important for helping to dissipate heat.
See, God, that is so cool. How do you decide what you're going to study? I mean, there's so many options out there. How do you choose what it is what project you're going to take on?
Yeah, that's a huge problem for us. It turns out we're not really very good at choosing. We just kind of do them all, and it's become a real problem because we've got so many projects going, and they're all cool, and we just want to do them all. And it turns out they all kind of relate to each other. And so, like, we can't really study airflow without studying blood flow, and then but the blood flow relates to the brain, so we have to understand how the brain works. And so, all of these studies overlap. They're all, in a sense, independent studies, but they all kind of overlap too. And so it's been this really exciting time for us, really for many, many years now, where we have all of these projects happening. In many cases, a lot of these projects, the individual projects might be like the doctoral dissertation project for one of our students. But that project will then fit into a larger project itself. And so many of our grad students are collaborating with each other and with me as we sort of put these different pieces together. The individual pieces are interesting, but as we start to put those pieces together, we're starting to really get a very nice picture of what these animals were like.
Now, do you have other paleontologists that come to you with a project maybe that they're working on that they need your expertise and assistance? Does that happen a lot with you as well?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, we're often. Science has become very specialized, and so our team sort of has, we have our gig, we have our thing that we do, and so we work with lots of teams. We work with teams that very often will be team members that will be involved in the collection of the fossils. So there will be people that are more geological that will be talking about details of the rocks in which the dinosaurs found, and that's important to tell us about the environment. And other people that will be specialists in understanding how we can learn how animals are related to each other. They're phylogenetic systematists. That's the term that we often use for those. Those are people that help us understand the relationships of dinosaurs. I don't do that. I don't do that. I don't do the geological thing, but I do our thing. And so I'm brought in as a team member to help. I'm sort of an anatomical hired gun that comes in and tries to help people understand what all those little bony doodads, all those little ridges of bone and canals, what all those might be telling us. And so I'm routinely, a member of a team. Science is very team-oriented these days, very collaborative, which is really exciting because there's so many things that are important, and we all individually can't know them all. And so we can assemble these teams, and we can get a lot of work done with a really well-formed team.
It would seem to me like the hardest thing you would have is making that decision what you want to use your technological magic on just for your own personal thing. But I would guess there's so many scientific papers needing your help. And like you said, a lot of your students, it's got to be difficult to decide what we get to do versus what you need to do versus what you want to do. Yeah.
I mean, we actually have some difficult discussions that we have actually within our group, because sometimes it actually can be hard for me because I'll be approached to participate in a project, and I'm almost in a bad position because in some cases I have really important data that can be brought to bear on that project, and I have really fairly unique ability or experience, either myself or within the context of our whole team. And it's almost like if I don't participate, I'm inhibiting the progress of science. But at the same time, there's only so many hours in the day and so much that we can do. Right. And so we actually have some real tough decisions sometimes as to what projects to get involved in. And it's very difficult sometimes to say no to a project, number one, that we can help. I mean, I feel bad. I want to help people. And sometimes if I say that I can't do a project, it's just a difficult thing to be able to say to somebody, because we may be in a unique position to advance that scientific project, but being able to fit it into our schedule can be very difficult. And so we make those tough calls. Right.
Well, one of the things that's happening right now is you have a YouTube series called Dissecting with Emily, where one of your students, Emily, who was one of our previous interviews, which was great, by the way, you're focusing right now on the type specimen of Tyrannosaurus Rex. How did you come to have access to that, and what was the reason behind it? What is it that you're trying to? Did they ask you to study it, or are you studying it for something else?
No, this was my project. So we've been working on T-Rex along with many other dinosaurs for many years. T-Rex is interesting for lots of reasons, not just because it's sort of a pop star, a movie star, which it is. T-Rex is just a super interesting animal. Tyrannosaurs in general are very interesting animals. Turns out there's lots of species and genera of tyrannosaurs, and Tyrannosaurus rex is, in a sense, the most extreme version of those. And so there's this nice evolutionary history leading to this very extreme animal. Tyrannosaurus rex is actually extreme for tyrannosaurs, and tyrannosaurs are actually pretty extreme for the theropod or predatory dinosaurs. So there's lots of interesting questions about Tyrannosaurus rex, some of which get into starting to explore the limits of biological design. Like how can your head be that big? A head that weighed more than the front four of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Right.
And so how did they do that? And so there's lots of questions about T-Rex. But one thing I mentioned before is that we as scientists need to ask questions that we can answer. And it turns out that T-Rex happened to live at the very end of the age of dinosaurs. And so it turns out if you live at the end of the age of dinosaurs, you're closer to us. And so there's a decent chance that your fossils might be in pretty good shape. And indeed, many of the fossils of Tyrannosaurus rex from the Hell Creek Formation are absolutely stunning. They're beautiful. Their bone texture is unbelievable. And so for somebody like me who wants to look at the minutest details, I can see them in T-Rex. And plus, T-Rex is really big. And it turns out the bony signatures of soft tissues, the grooves and canals and the textures left by the soft tissues on the bones are deeply etched into the bones of bigger animals. And if you're a big animal like T-Rex, you can really start to see some of these things. And so we've got interested in T-Rex partly as a means of really doing what we're calling high-resolution soft tissue reconstruction. It turns out the holotype specimen of T-Rex, the holotype means it's one of the very earliest specimens. It's sort of the first best specimen, the specimen that was good enough that we could attach a name to. And so the holotype specimen is actually the very specimen that the name Tyrannosaurus rex is applied to. So all the other specimens of T-Rex, famous ones like Sue or Stan or any of these other named specimens, are what we call referred specimens, meaning that they seem similar enough to the holotype specimen that we can refer them to pertaining to Tyrannosaurus rex. And it turns out that the holotype specimen of Tyrannosaurus rex that was discovered in 1902 and named in 1905 by Henry Fairfield Osborn is an absolutely stunningly beautiful specimen. All of the bones that we have, we don't have all the bones, but the bones that we do have are all disarticulated, which means they're isolated bones. So we can look at them from all sides, and they're absolutely beautifully preserved. And so, in a sense, we're starting with this holotype specimen of T-Rex to help us understand the detailed structure of the soft tissues that are attaching to the bones of T-Rex. And what we're trying to do, like we do all along, is to try and share what we've been finding as we go. I mean, to be honest, we're not giving everything away at this point. We're sharing a lot of what we're discovering, but we're trying to also put some pieces together that we'll be, pulling out for some publications as we go as well. And indeed, what we've been doing, working as a team, and Emily Caggiano has been an important member of that team. She's a sophomore at Ohio University that's been working with us, doing lots of dissections of the modern-day relatives of dinosaurs that help us understand dinosaurs like T-Rex. And so we started this series that was on Facebook and YouTube called Dissecting with Emily. And so we sort of moved from dissecting with a scalpel and scissors into, dissecting the dinosaurs, trying to understand what they're like as she's been sort of involved in this T-Rex project. And so just yesterday, Emily and I recorded our most recent installment of Dissecting with Emily, looking at some other bones of T-Rex, and we'll release that video soon as well. Nice.
And now you've had the chance to experience amazing different specimens. Did you feel anything different when you got a chance to put your hands on the original type specimen of what is the most popular dinosaur on the planet? Did you turn for a moment back into a little kid, or were you able to maintain your professionalism and just say this is just a fossil?
I am a professional paleontologist, George. I have handled countless important fossils from all over the globe. But no, I just became I became the 6-year-old kid again. I mean, some fossils just have serious mojo. There's something that just comes off of them. Some fossils, Archaeopteryx is like that. I've had the good fortune of being able to study many of the original specimens of Archaeopteryx.
God.
And specimens like Archaeopteryx or the holotype of T-Rex, it's something it happens to everybody when you're just in the presence of them. I mean, when you're just sharing the same space, you're breathing oxygen that is just circulated over these bones, and let alone you have the ability to touch them. It's a tremendous privilege. It's an honor. It's something that we take very seriously. The fact that we have the ability to and have been entrusted to take these treasures on loan, bring them back to Ohio University for study, is something that we take extremely seriously. These are things that are, all fossils are in a sense, documents in the history of life on our planet, and they're all important. But it's one of these situations also where prehistory crosses history. So many of these specimens are historic in the sense of what they have created. So lots of fossils will tell us facts about the extinct animals, and that's important. We care about those as fossils. But there are some fossils that have changed thought. Archaeopteryx, for example, is one of these animals that is a very important fossil and has facts to tell us about the early transition of birds. But it is so much more. Archaeopteryx is found less than 2 years after Darwin published The Origin of Species. And actually, we're recording this on February 11th. Tomorrow will be February 12th, which is Charles Darwin's birthday. Happy birthday, Charles Darwin.
Absolutely.
But Archaeopteryx wound up being a really important document in the history of evolutionary thought. Likewise with T-Rex, which actually turns out T-Rex, including the holotype, was actually discovered by a guy named Barnum Brown, who in fact shares a birthday with Charles Darwin. It's Barnum Brown's birthday tomorrow as well.
Wow.
And so, let's just try to tie this all together. A nice, neat package. If I can somehow work Abraham Lincoln in there, too. It's Abe Lincoln's birthday tomorrow,
he liked
too.
birds. I understand Abe was a big bird fan.
There you go. That's close enough.
They lived in his beard.
That's right. We'll throw Abe Lincoln in there, too. But the idea is that, Tyrannosaurus rex obviously was a very important, historically important dinosaur. It told us a lot about how dinosaurs could be. And then, of course, T-Rex wound up being this, breakthrough star. It was something that even in its time, in the early 1900s, when it was announced in 1905, and then when the really, really, really nice specimen was found by Barnum Brown, that was mounted in the American Museum of Natural History. That became an absolute sensation and changed people's perception of dinosaurs. And at that point, a dinosaur became a pop star. It's often said that Tyrannosaurus rex, or T-Rex, is the best known scientific name. It's more widely known than is Homo sapiens, our own scientific name. And so T-Rex is really important. And so for us to actually have, T-Rex is just down the hall from me right now, that holotype specimen. And it's just, it's just an amazing thing to have that opportunity. And Emily Caggiano and I had the opportunity to study, so the skull bones of the holotype were in the collections, and I was able to get those on loan, but the postcranial bones, the hip bones, and the femora, the thigh bones, and some of the other bones, the arm bones, those are actually mounted on the exhibit at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh. And we were able to get inside that exhibit, a place where many people would love to be able to go, but the guards would haul them out. We were able to go in there and actually study those holotype bones. And I've had, a number of experiences like that as a professional are just such a privilege, an honor, and a responsibility that I take very seriously. The 6-year-old in me is going nuts, and I have to really be very professional so I just don't completely geek out over this whole experience. But it's and to be honest with you, it literally is a dream come true. I mean, as a 6-year-old, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I knew what a paleontologist was, and I wanted to be one, and I am one. And I worked hard. I went to all, lots of schooling and did all the hard work. And now I get to be that paleontologist. I get to go to museums, and museum curators respect me and let me do things, let me borrow things, let me study things. And I get to publish it. I get to share it with as many people as I can. I get to work with students and give them that opportunity to get that start. And that's a real privilege to be able to provide opportunities to other people, to younger people, is something that I'm very grateful for.
Well, that is one of the things that I absolutely love about what you do is the amount of outreach that you try to do to the general public. You don't find a lot of people in your position that you see pictures of them constantly being posted on Facebook where you're talking to a child and you're giving that child your attention, and you're in whatever it is that child asked you is your most important question you've ever received. And that is the most admirable thing I can say that I find in you, is that you do that. How much do you enjoy doing that, or is that just part of your job?
Actually, it's not part of my job at all. It's actually not part of it.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah, it doesn't count. I mean, for what I do. I mean, in terms of what I get evaluated on by my department, it's for publications and grants, and the teaching that I do to the medical students. So the outreach it's the right thing to do. I mean, it's what we should be doing. And when I do lots of sort of bigger programs, but I also do tours for, a family that'll come through, and I will talk to them. I love talking to the kids. I mean, I was that kid, that's looking in my lab, except I didn't get that opportunity. Right. I didn't touch my first dinosaur bone until I was a graduate student. And so these kids get to do that at the age of 6. And so I love talking to the kids. But I also talk to the parents, because in some respects, I already got the kids. They dig this stuff. They understand it. They're little scientists. But I really want to talk to their parents as well, because it's their parents that nurture the interest in the kids. It's the parents that take them to the library. It's the parents that take them to the museums. It's the parents that vote. And so when I talk to the kids, but I'm also talking to the parents and trying to instill in them not just a sense of wonder that I can do with the kids. They come in with a sense of wonder, but also a sense of responsibility is why it's important for kids, but also people to be interested in these things and to try to pursue them, how they relate to just general life.
Well, it's making the point that I made earlier, that we have a need for more outreach. And when I say to educate the public, that's not detrimental. It's what I mean by it is educate them in the things that you are doing to help us have a better understanding. And I think as people have a better understanding, they are more likely to want to take their kid to a museum, because there's going to be a kid that's going to stand in front of that Carnegie Museum Tyrannosaurus Rex, and that's going to be the moment that they are going to reflect upon was the moment they changed their life and did something for science. And that, I think, is what everybody's goal should be, is try to bring more people in that's what I kind of see my job as. I don't do any of the research. I stand on the shoulder of giants. I get to take what you do and I get to convey it to large numbers of kids. I see, 20,000 kids in a month. I kind of see
you can do that in a way and in a volume that I can't.
Right.
And so we're part of the same team here.
Very much so. And so what I see is that if I can point them towards a Professor Larry Witmer, and if you can then reinforce what you do and how you do it, then I think all science is looked at from a different perspective, and we're not putting these divisive lines in the sand and saying, you're this and I'm that kind of thing. And that's what I hope you do every time you do these outreach with these kids, because you're right, you're absolutely affecting the kid. The kid's going to lose their mind and you're going to be their hero, and they start finding out that you're associated with 40 million different papers and you've been on every dinosaur show in the world. You're gonna have a whole bunch of groupies. Now that they know you play the guitar, you just picked up a whole bunch of older students as well now.
That's all right.
You put the rock in rock and roll. Oh my God, there
we go.
You need to make a T-shirt of that.
Scientists are people too. We do all kinds of things.
That's right. I'm going to make a T-shirt though with you playing the guitar and he puts the rock in rock and roll.
There you go.
So in closing, is there anything that's on the horizon that you are at liberty to discuss? Do you have anything coming down the pike that you think is going to be amazing, or are you unable to talk about it at this particular point?
Yeah, we got lots of stuff that we can't talk about because there's, we need to wait till we can sort of make a splash with it.
Sure.
We've got lots more stuff that we're doing. I mean, a lot of the Tyrannosaur stuff that we're doing, we're going to try to share as much of that as we can. Some of it we'll keep out because we sort of need to sort of put everything together scientifically before we start releasing stuff. But we're going to be trying to do more and more T-Rex stuff, but we got lots of other stuff that's brewing as well.
Well, like I told everybody, I will put links, but for those of you that want to jump on just by listening, first, I recommend you go to YouTube, and you can go to youtube.com/user/Witmer Lab, WITMERLAB, Witmer Lab, and you can look at the entire video series, not just the Dissecting with Emily, but all of the videos you place there. And then the greatest place to go is to go directly to Ohio University website and look for Witmer Lab. It's ohio.edu/people/Witmer_L/lab.htm. I'll put links to all that. And then finally, go to your Facebook page, Witmer Lab Facebook page. The Witmer Lab is so filled with so much information, as Professor Witmer's talking about sharing and the need to share. Oh, you guys have got to go and look at what's going on. You have so much stuff happening there. That's like its own world.
Oh yeah, no, there's so much fun stuff happening in our lab, and I'm just thrilled to work with so many really talented students. I'm just trying to keep up most days. And just try to capture everything that's doing and share as much as we can. It's a really exciting place. I'm proud to be a part of it.
Well, it is the most fascinating place in the world. He is a professor of anatomy and a Chang Ying-Chien professor of paleontology at the Department of Biomedical Sciences at the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine in Ohio University. Professor Larry Witmer, it has been a huge honor and a pleasure to have you on the show, and I hope one day we could bring you back to talk about your latest and greatest discoveries.
Well, thanks so much, George. I'd be happy to. It's a lot of fun.
It's been great. So when I go ahead and we redo this again, because this was just a practice run, this time when I record it, boy, I hope it turns out as good as the practice, because that was a great... Thank you again.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I'm glad. I appreciate it. And, one other thing I want to mention, thank you for working so hard with all of your students, giving your students some props and doing that. that's pretty admirable as well. And if you ever have any student who's working on something of interest and you would like us to give them some recognition, don't ever hesitate to give us that, because anything we can do to advance the science of paleontology, that's what we want to do.
Cool. No, I'm happy to do so.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You bet, George.
All right.
Yep. Have a good evening.
You too.
Yep. Bye-bye.
See ya. Well, there you have it, you guys. That interview was really a lot of fun. Dr. Witmer is an amazing person, and I hope you all take the time to visit his various pages, his Facebook page, his YouTube video page, his Witmer Lab page, and do some more research on him, and you'll simply be stunned at how much stuff that he has accomplished in his career. Until next time, everybody, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You'll see links on my podcast page, which is dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com. Visit my online catalog at store.dinosaurgeorge.com, and then check out my website, which is dinosaurgeorge.com. Until I talk to you guys again, be kind to each other. Treat each other with respect, even if you don't agree politically or personally or religiously or any of those things. It's still okay to disagree with someone without having to attack them personally. That just makes no sense to me. You don't want to only surround yourself with people who just think exactly like you, because what you're going to find as you do that is little by little you're going to lose more and more friends, because little by little there's only one person who is exactly like you, and that's you. And it's not going to be a lot of fun when you are your only friend. I hope that makes sense to you. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, and I will be looking forward to the next podcast. We'll see you.
Thank you for listening to the Dinosaur George Show. Please follow us on our social media links and join our mailing list. If you're interested in having Dinosaur George speak at your event, please visit our website at dinosaurgeorge.com. Until next time, keep digging for